Good morning, folks. A quick book review here. I haven't done a book review for quite a few weeks now. It's been quite a while since last year. I finished reading this Riddick Bowe book. I love Riddick Bowe. He was a big top heavyweight when I first got into boxing, so he has a special place in my heart. It's only a short book, as you can see. It's only about 160 odd pages. There's no photos in it because I'm a sucker for my photos, my pictures in a boxing book. It's very it's a bit weird in places. I did enjoy it. I read it in the morning basically. I just sat up. I had a week off work recently, and I just sat up and read it in a day. One thing I will say, at the beginning of the book, he talks a lot about his family, his mother and his siblings, how tough it was growing up in New York. And that was quite heartwarming, quite interesting to find out where he came from. However, it did delve into territory. I did actually wonder at one point if I was actually reading Deontay Wilder's autobiography, because some of the stories he comes out with are pretty much either outright lies or very delusional. For example, he tends to gloss over a lot of his boxing career, a lot of the fights. He doesn't talk about individual fights. He talks quite in depth about the Holyfield trilogy, obviously when he won the undisputed title from Holyfield in 1992. That was a fantastic, probably in my opinion, probably one of the greatest, top 5 greatest heavyweight title fights of all time. And he talks about the rematch, and obviously when he lost, and the infamous fan man incident, and obviously the trilogy fight that he won by knockout. But the point I was getting to, I kind of thought perhaps I was reading Deontay Wilder's autobiography, as he talks about why the fight with Lennox Lewis never happened. Now, obviously, I've said before, that's probably the greatest fight, in my opinion, in my lifetime, that never happened, that could have happened. And he basically blames everybody else but himself. Oh, it wasn't him, it was his management team, it wasn't his fault. And he glosses over really, but he does address when he vacated the WBC title in 93, rather than defend it against Lewis. And he basically said, it wasn't his idea, he was coerced into doing that, it wasn't his fault, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, there's more than a whiff of bullshit about it. Yeah, for anybody like myself who's been around for a long time and has studied boxing history and has been following the sport for a long time, you know the score, you know what was going on. It was between pretty much Bowe and his manager, Rock Newman. They didn't want the fight for whatever reason. They just didn't want it. They priced themselves out of it. They made things difficult. In the book, he tries to say that Lewis was the one who didn't want the fight, which I find hard to believe, because Lewis was the one, and his team were the ones pushing for it all the time. They turned up at his fights. They turned up at press conferences pushing for it. Whereas Bowe was always the one who always seemed to try and sort of walk away from it and price himself out of it, and for whatever reason. So that's one part of it. I kind of thought, that sounds a bit like Wilder, with the delusional kind of talk. There was a talk of, he went to see Mike Tyson in prison just in 95, just before Tyson was released. And they were talking about they were going to fight each other upon Tyson's release, which again I find hard to believe, that Mike Tyson had been away from the sport of boxing since 1991. Why would he fight a big, dangerous former heavyweight champion like Riddick Bowe? I think he was actually probably WBO champion at the time. So that, and of course, other factors happened and we couldn't make the fight. And I kind of thought to myself, well, again, there's a lot of bullshit about that. Why would Mike Tyson, who's been in prison since 91, 92, come back and have his return fight against Riddick Bowe? That would make no sense. So that's another thing. And he also talks about the 2 infamous fights with Andrew Golota. He won both by disqualification, because, as we all know, Golota can't help himself. He can't help hitting people in the bollocks. And in the first fight, he says he was really well and he thought he was winning. You're the only one, mate, because we've all seen that fight and you definitely were not winning. And he makes the statement in this book that he thinks that one of his team poisoned him, or drugged him. Sorry, drugged him was the actual wording. Spiked his water and drugged him, and that's why he was so flat. Again, when I read that, I thought, oh, am I reading Deontay Wilder's book, or is this Riddick Bowe's book? And again, when he talks about the rematch, and yes, he did lose a lot of weight, he got himself back in shape, but he took a fucking pounding in that fight. Yes, I know he was more competitive, he knocked Gallotta down, he cut him, but overall, a lot of people who watched it live, and if you watch it back now, it's on YouTube, you can see it, a lot of people, he was taking a hellacious beating in that fight, and people wanted it stopped. People, the commentators, the ring people at ringside, everybody wanted that fight stopped because he was taking a beating and he was a fucking mess, and he was lucky he won by disqualification because obviously, as we know, Andrew Gallotta, bit of a head case, couldn't help himself hitting people in the balls. So yeah, there were a few delusional rants in this book. I did enjoy reading it. Like I say, it's only a short book, as you can see. It's a very, very short book, which I was quite disappointed with, actually, because, you know, he had a hell of a career, and he's done some things, obviously, since boxing, like he tried his hand at kickboxing and things like that, which failed miserably. And obviously, his conviction for kidnapping his ex-wife and children, things like that. And he used the excuse of brain damage for his excuse for why he did that. He's had a hell of an interesting life, hell of a career. The first man to win all 4 major heavyweight titles, WBA, WBC, IBF and WBO. Obviously Tyson Fury's done it since. Not at the same time, mind, but they've held all the titles. He was the first to do it. You know, his victories over Holyfield, Gonzalez. Yeah, he had a hell of a career, and I was a bit disappointed about how short the book was. And there's no pictures from his career because, like I said before, I'm a big sucker for. I like if I'm reading a biography or an autobiography, I like to see pictures of their career. But no, it's worth a read. It's worth a look. I mean, if you don't know too much about Bowe, you probably won't learn a lot because a lot of it is very delusional, in my opinion, and outright lies. If you know all about Bowe, again, it'll be quite. If you're a big fan of Bowe and you know a lot about him, it'd be quite intriguing just to read it and see some of the nonsense he comes out with, really, because some of it is nonsense. But you know, to hear where he came from, how he got into boxing, I found that very interesting, very heartwarming the way he talks about his mother and things like that. But yeah, some of it is a bit out there, some of his weird theories. So there you go. That's enough out of me. You take care, folks, and I'll speak to you soon.